Yes. Hi, we made it.
We made it. Cool, calm, and collected. Thank you for being patient, everybody, and thank you for being such a good team, Rachel. We just stayed on track and we got there, as happens. Exciting topic, as always. Would you like to introduce it today, Rachel?
Yes, I would. And I'd like to reiterate thanks to everybody who was excited to join us today and has been patiently waiting. So thank you. I know there's a few people who are interested and excited to join us on the topic that has been requested last time we did a live stream last Sunday by Jo. So I hope that Jo is about to join us if she hasn't already. And the topic is trauma bonding. Now, this phrase trauma bonding, I only heard myself maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And now I hear people using this phrase quite often. So I think I want to start by just clarifying what trauma bonding is not on a technical level, because I hear people saying, you know, I got together with my partner, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, or this new friend, based on the fact that we bonded over having been through similar traumas. And then they use this term trauma bonding. And that's not quite what it means. But I understand why we get confused. It is very easy to kind of feel connected to someone because you've been through similar traumas, whether it's in previous relationships or perhaps, you know, a difficult boss in the workplace, or, you know, some other very distressing or even traumatic event. And that helps you connect with another person who's been through something similar. You empathize, you sympathize, and perhaps you even collude with one another, you know, us and them. Having a shared enemy can be a very good way to bond in the beginning. But that's not really what we mean by trauma bonding in the literature. I've heard the phrase moan bonding, so I think that's a bit more like moan bonding, you know, let's kind of moan together about some things that we've both experienced, which is really understandable, but not a basis for a long-term secure and healthy attachment probably either, but very understandable. But what we actually mean by the phrase trauma bonding in psychology is an unhealthy attachment. Now, this could be a romantic partner, but it can also happen in friendship and family relationships. Trauma bonding is usually an abusive relationship, and it's rooted in a desperate need on the part of the person being, you know, abused to some extent or used, a need for the relationship to continue. Also, the one doing the using or abusing, of course, might want it to continue. And it's kind of got an addictive quality to it. Even though it's so unhealthy, it's a bit different to codependency, which is a phrase many people interested in psychology are familiar with. Codependency is more when, you know, someone is addicted to caring for the other person, placing the other person's needs above their own. But this goes next level. Trauma bonding goes next level, where we put up with unhealthy behaviors. And I guess I want to just say one more thing, which is why, you know, because some people would never put up with this. You know, they've got a very good self-esteem. And if they were starting to be treated badly or used by another human, they would very quickly say, this is not acceptable to me. You know, I'm not going to put up with this. And yet all of us may be susceptible, or many of us, to a trauma bond if we experience high levels of reward, therefore oxytocin and dopamine in the brain in the beginning. So there is a chemical basis to this trauma bonding phenomenon. And there's some brain imaging studies which have found that brains undergo specific changes in terms of attachment. And people, once they're in a trauma bonding situation, they find it very difficult to get out of it sometimes, because their anxiety about then getting out of that relationship is as bad as the anxiety that brought them into the relationship in the first place. So it's really difficult.
Okay. There is so much content in what you've just shared. What I've heard you say is that it's not just having the same kind of trauma. It's there's particular qualities. It's not just in romantic relationships. It involves abuse or use, and each of those I think have a lot more in them to break down what actually is abuse and what actually is use. How might our listeners identify if there's particularly those really subtle forms of coercion or manipulation that is sometimes hard to put your finger on, and the addictive quality, because infatuation is addictive. I mean, biologically that serves us, right? But psychologically, it does not, especially, as you say, if we're seeking secure and healthy attachments, which certainly there reaches a tipping point of maturity where you realise, maybe the spunkiest looking guy in the house is not going to be the most securely attached. But there's a difficulty in leaving. I mean, this is, I've not heard the term before, but it's occurring to me this is almost as important as gaslighting for us to be aware of culturally.
Yeah, well, in the trauma bonding scenario, we do experience these, we see these kinds of emotional manipulation phenomena like gaslighting, like intimidation, minimization, deflection of blame. These are forms of emotional abuse, as you mentioned, coercion and threats. And so, those of us who grew up with a model for emotional and physical safety, mutual respect, trust, healthy boundaries, communication, we're much less prone to ending up in a trauma-bonded relationship. But if we grew up feeling emotionally neglected or isolated or blamed or any kind of emotional abuse, having poor boundaries modeled to us, mistrustful relationships, then we're much more prone to end up in a trauma-bonded relationship. So it's on a continuum like everything. It can be, subtle and hard to detect, or it can be quite obvious. This is a trauma bond. This is an unhealthy relationship.
Would you mind just backtracking for a second? I heard you say intimidation and coercion, but there were some really important ones in there that are worth us putting language around, so that if anyone is just having a sense of, actually I can relate to that, they can flag it. What else did you have on that list, Rachel?
Yeah, so I had intimidation,
pushing someone to the point that they feel threatened in a way.
That's right. They feel afraid. They feel frightened of losing the person's approval, losing the connection, because of threats and coercion, like you mentioned.
Yeah. What else did you have? There was one I missed that was a golden one.
Minimization.
Minimization, yes.
Yeah, which is a form of gaslighting, when people say, oh, you're overreacting, or it's not that bad, or minimizing our feelings about what's going on. This is a form of gaslighting because it leaves the person second guessing, doubting themselves, doubting their own reality, their own feelings and perceptions, which, sensitive people are prone to this because we, if we're highly sensitive people, we know, okay, I'm not always right. I might be wrong. So, when we're humble and sensitive, it's very easy to be kind of on the receiving end of gaslighting and to, accept blame when we aren't to blame. And so, minimization is one form of that. What else did I say? Poor boundaries, control, threat, and coercion. I think you said that one.
And predisposition if the upbringing was one where the needs were not met.
Emotional neglect, manipulation, that kind of thing.
It keeps ringing to me of attachment theory and security.
Yeah.
So many of our conversations come back to that.
Exactly. And so much of the cure comes back to, looking into our attachment behaviors, our attachment style, but we'll come very shortly to the way we can heal from. There's quite a few steps we can take to heal from a trauma bonded relationship. But I'd like to mention that I was actually on the Channel 9 News this week in Brisbane. For a sad reason, in a way. Here in Queensland, a young girl died in a cult scenario in a town in Queensland called Toowoomba. And they had me on as an expert to ask, how in the world could it be that people would end up in a cult and stay in a cult, and that this could happen, that a child could die because easy to access medicines were withheld because the parents were persuaded that God would take care of the child. And so they denied a diabetic child access to insulin, which is easily available in Australia. And the 8-year-old girl in question died. And now 14 people are up on murder charges. So this was a news story this week. And so this topic of trauma bonding was something that I was interviewed about. And it's this idea that, we can join a group or a relationship based on a trauma bond because we have an very anxious, insecure attachment style. And at first, the relationship or the group seems to contain the anxiety. It seems to give us some sense of belonging. It seems to give us a sense of safety, containment, and security. But once the person realizes, or the people in the cult realize, maybe this is not quite right. There's so much fear about challenging, questioning, or leaving the situation, that the anxiety is what keeps them in the relationship. And so many people I've met in trauma bonded relationships, as I imagine it would have been with this cult in Toowoomba, what keeps them there is fear. Fear and guilt, fear and shame and guilt, very easily. People are manipulated by these emotions when they don't know what else to do.
That's what's occurring to me, that if it's sensitive types that are drawn into it, sensitive types, from my experience, are more likely to be in touch with their emotions. And if we could identify, okay, yes, that's fear, that's guilt, that's shame, that's doubt even, that in a relationship, especially in a way that it can't be freely spoken about or freely addressed, would be a clear flag of a need to weigh up, as you say, okay, so I'm anxious if I leave, but I'm anxious if I stay, and if I could zoom out long enough to see the bigger picture perspective, then I can do that analysis.
And that's the first step. Thank you for saying that, because that is the first step, is to make a commitment to live in reality as much as one can do that. It's very easy to hold on to wishful thinking or a fantasy that this, things are going to change. He or she is going to, get better, improve, treat me well one day. In the cult scenario, I imagine the promise was, that we'll all kind of be, raptured up to heaven or something. But, we do need to zoom out, as you say, and commit to seeing as clearly as we can, getting feedback, living in reality, trusting our feelings that this is not okay, that I deserve better than this.
Wow. Okay. I'm wondering, because this is actually really important, and I'm thinking our listeners will probably want to write this down, if not for themselves, for their future selves or for a friend. And as you're talking, it also brings to mind a kind of an addiction bond that I've seen, whether it's around alcohol or substances, and the culture then forms around it. So again, that assessment is a really hard one.
Really hard. Yes.
One reality. I like that.
Yeah, commit to reality. I'm looking at the article that I posted on our page earlier, and that was step 1. And step 2 is live in real time. Live now. Notice what's happening now. Pay attention to your emotions now. Notice how trapped you're feeling now, and live one decision at a time, live one day at a time. It's very easy to kind of go into all or nothing thinking or catastrophic thinking and imagine, you know, how horrendous it's going to be if I give up this person or this group, you know, to which I'm trauma bonded. And as anyone who's recovered from almost anything, whether it's addiction, illness,
obsessive thinking, obsessive behaviors, compulsive behaviors. Yeah.
Anyone who's on any kind of recovery path knows that it's one step at a time, one day at a time, one situation and one decision at a time. Try not to think about everything all at once, because that won't help you.
It speaks to me of staying grounded in the body.
Yeah.
Anchored in myself, trusting. You said trust ourselves.
Yes.
Trust your experience. If you feel uncomfortable, that is valid.
Exactly.
If you feel awkward, that is valid. I mean, these statements come up a lot around trauma.
Yeah.
If you feel icky, that is very valid. So find a safe place to explore, and ideally have a safe person who doesn't put bias.
That's very important. If we want to identify and feel our feelings and try and make some sense of our feelings, we do need to find a safe place to express them. Now, journaling is a really good one, because we can journal anywhere, anytime. And these days we almost all have phones. So we can even journal on our phone if we don't have any other paper or device or whatever. It's one really good way to explore our feelings. But as you mentioned, finding at least one safe person who we can talk to. Now, I know this is really hard when people are stuck in domestic violence situations, and I've worked with many clients who have been, and I would never push them to, just throw the baby out with the bathwater all in one day, because that might not be safe. They do need to take it one step at a time, but it starts by talking to others, seeking emotional and social support, and exploring those feelings, coming out of the freeze response and the people-pleasing response, which is usually very deeply conditioned into a person who ends up in a trauma bond.
Yes, and when you're talking, it reminds me of that social normalization that is so essential to reducing shame. If I can come to you and go, I'm drinking more than usual. I know I said that to you recently. I'm drinking more than usual, and you kind of, you didn't judge it. You allowed me to speak about it, and then, but I also have a sense of, even by talking with you, I think about, well, I wonder how much Rachel drinks, what is a normal thing? And then, when we go to a presentation, I mean, these are real-time examples, and we make jokes about drinking in quite an academic group and they don't laugh. There's a kind of a social normalization. That was quite interesting.
Oh, last weekend, yeah.
But yeah, the point is that the social normalization, I think, can help with this kind of trauma bonding, whether it is, a cult. Like we all need influences from lots of different perspectives, and that is a healthy thing all around.
And this is what Brené Brown talks about with shame. She says the way to diminish shame is to speak it. It can't handle being spoken.
Wow.
And as soon as we reach out for connection and social support with somebody we can trust, our level of shame starts to decrease. It's the number one antidote. Shame is such an isolating emotion, closely followed by fear, that once we reach out and start to speak our shame and fear, we start to deal with it. We start to face it, and therefore we start to feel a little more empowered. But we can't stop there. We do need to keep our eye on the hooks, the triggers. All of us have unlived life inside of us, whether it's dreams that are unfulfilled, fantasies, unmet needs, which we talk about quite a lot. And, the idea that we can have all of our needs met by one person is obviously an illusion. And it's an illusion that's perpetuated by this culture, and none of us is completely immune to it. And so there's a bit of work to be done here in identifying our triggers and our hooks, whether they're cultural or personal. And looking
an example of those, Rach, the hooks and triggers.
So great. There's probably many. For some of the clients I've worked with who are struggling to get out of an abusive relationship, their biggest hook can be, well, this guy was so amazing when I first met him. And the fantasy, the dream that they had of their marriage, for example, I'm thinking of a couple of different women, they get hooked in by him reminding, he will remind her of, how much they, had so much fun when they first met and they were so in love. And, she gets hooked back in by the fantasy, which is not happening in reality. And in the cult, I imagine the hook was, you're going to go to heaven. God will favor you. So the hooks are often psychological hooks, but the triggers can be, what the other person, the abuser, says or does to kind of draw us back in, hook us back in. So if we can identify when we're being hooked, that's a really important step as well, so that we have that bit of perspective. So we have some choice then around whether we react in the same old way or get grounded, pause, stop, slow down. Remember that we might be able to make a different choice. We might be able to assert our needs, honor our feelings. And this is hard to do because, of course, it does risk, this is part of trauma bonding, it risks the other person upping the ante and getting angry, or it risks losing the relationship. And this is why it's so hard. And in less obvious trauma bonds, the person on the receiving end is wondering, is this salvageable? Could this other person change? Is this worth it? That's the more subtle forms that I've seen, until sometimes eventually they realize, no, actually, this person has no empathy for me. And that's the difference. In a healthy attachment relationship, each person has genuine empathy for the other one. And if they say, I need space, or I need reassurance, or I need something else, the other person or people honor that. They can respect that. They can negotiate around that. But in a trauma bond, that's not what you see. So, get clear on how you're staying hooked. Realize that you may need to lose this relationship and get support in order to grieve the loss, because it's still genuine grief. Women I've worked with who've left domestic violence situations have said to me, because he was a perpetrator, I don't feel like I have a right to be deeply, sad and grief-stricken. And I need to reassure them, of course you do, because it was good in the beginning, and nobody is all good or all bad, generally speaking. So there's still grief at the loss of the fantasy and of the connection with the other person. So we do need to get better at grieving the loss of something that was very valuable to us at one point.
So far, the steps I've heard you say are to live in reality, so to commit to seeing as clearly as I possibly can. And that is very yogic. That is very meditation.
Mindfulness, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. Vipassana means to see things as they really are. So if anyone's interested in seeing reality, go and check out Vipassana. Yoga talks a lot about clear comprehension. The Yoga Sutras emphasize the value of clear comprehension in contrast to delusion and imagination, and even sluggishness, like an absence of mind, as well as distinguish it from memories. So this is so relevant to what you've described, because memories could often guide us back into a situation when they're not clear comprehension, they're not reality.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of come to the conclusion, the reason so many spiritual traditions emphasize seeing reality, dealing with our illusions and delusions, and that every good form of psychotherapy does that in some way or another as well, is because the human mind, all of our minds, all of us are prone to illusion and to delusion, and we can't even help it. Like all the cognitive psychology experiments that show how easily our minds can be fooled. Even just simple experiments where people are given 2 glasses of water and told that one is pure spring water and the other one is tap water. And the first person says, oh, it's the cup on the left. The next person says, it's the cup on the left, the cup on the left. Everybody decides it's the cup on the left. Highly educated people. Turns out they're both tap water. People actually get a different experience, a different perception based on peer pressure and social norms, based on beliefs, because they believed one was filtered water and one was tap water. And then people after the experiment say, I could swear I could taste the difference. This is how easily our senses can be fooled by the power of our beliefs. So examining our beliefs with the help of a good therapist, through journaling, there's multiple ways, meditation, which settles us down enough to kind of see what we're really thinking. This is a very important part of it. What am I believing? What are my core beliefs here about myself, about the world, about relationships? Part of this work is examining those core beliefs to see how they're driving my reactions and what I put up with and what I, am probably not going to be willing to accept going forward. And it's okay to change and to get to a point where you think, I'm not going to accept this anymore. Of course, that involves loss. That's where the grief work comes in, because if I decide I'm not going to accept something anymore, I've changed my beliefs around it, therefore I change my actions around it, I will feel a loss. And we're all afraid of pain, and grief is a form of pain. And therefore, and this is why we need friends and therapists and social support, because, life is full of pain and disappointment, as well as, joy and beauty. So, yeah, there's quite a few elements here.
It's obviously a process, and potentially quite a long process, to leave a trauma bonded relationship. These steps are wonderful. Keeping an eye on the triggers. So specifically, what would you encourage people to look out for? And what would you encourage them to do? Just in very simple terms.
Well, I would look out for signs of emotional manipulation, like I was saying before. If the other person's minimizing our feelings, deflecting responsibility and blame back onto us, and not accepting, not looking at themselves. In a healthy relationship, each of us can go, you know what, I see my part in this issue. I see my part in this dynamic, and I'm sorry for my part.
So both partners acting with a level of self-responsibility,
yes,
and mutuality in that both are showing up, taking some ownership. Yes, that is a flag. If my partner's not willing to take some responsibility for an issue that's come up, even a single issue, that is a flag for me. Because any issue, it's only going to be an issue if both parties have something to contribute. Otherwise, if I bring an issue, it's not an issue. Or if you bring an issue, it's not really an issue. I can just hear you and we can work through it. But yes, self-responsibility, both parties taking a level of self-responsibility, that sounds like a pretty core issue here. So then what would you recommend? Just the very first step for people to take if they're starting to think, look, this might be me and I'm scared about my future. There's like high level anxiety here because the bond is based on my trauma. That's a double dose. Then what?
Well, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, I think it was him or Peter Levine, both amazing trauma therapists. They said, that the damage done to us through traumatic bonds, through relationships, is mainly healed through corrective experiences of healthier relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So relationships can cause damage, but they can also heal us over time, enormously so. So I think the first step is to, in addition to journaling and finding grounding practices, I think it is seeking safe connections. I think so much healing happens through having safe connections.
Yes, you used the word trust before.
Yes, trusting, so that we, instead of staying stuck in the trauma bonded relationships, we start, and it takes time, nothing happens overnight. We start to form relationships with people, that are healthier, where each person can take responsibility, where they're mutual, like you said. And now that can be with a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
You're a therapist of a different kind. We're both therapists, and people don't always believe it when I say it, but we genuinely love and care about our clients. We think about them when they're not with us. We want them to be happy and be well. And there's a genuine human bond there, even though it's a therapeutic relationship and it's more one way. I'm not going to talk about my problems with my clients. That's why I have friends. That's why I have my own therapist, because we all need safe connections. So we can have therapeutic relationships. I mean, there's Australia, we're so lucky in Australia. We've got so many good 24-hour counselling telephone services. You can call Beyond Blue and Lifeline. And I know for a fact that those services, I have a cousin who works for Lifeline, and she has callers who know she works on Thursday nights or whatever, and they call every Thursday night and they ask to speak to her. And if she's not available, she calls them back. So people have formed healthy relationships with people on the telephone.
Before you go on, because I'm aware we do need to check in with our audience, but what I've just heard you say is that it's key to building a trusting relationship, and that can come from many different places.
Yeah.
And that even a therapeutic relationship can be a corrective experience where I can get a dose of a secure attachment.
Of safety.
Enough that I can recognize it and start to identify it around me.
And exactly. And as I start to recognize it and identify it, then I can start to recognize it and identify it in potential acquaintances and potential friends. Yeah. And over time, make different kinds of connections, make different kinds of friends. If in the past my partners or friends haven't treated me very well, it's a real process, like you say.
It is a long-term goal, a really long-term goal.
Yeah.
I'm aware that every box we open, we could keep unpacking.
Yeah.
But there is a simple journal exercise that's come to mind while I'm listening to you. And thank you for bringing this to our attention, Rachel, because I was not aware of this. And I think it is, as I say, equal to gaslighting in reaching common awareness. And that is this is one of my favourite journaling exercises. It's simply to take a page and fold it down the middle. And then on one side, you write, a healthy relationship is ... And then on the other side, a healthy relationship is not. And just to get really clear on, okay, well, what is? Because we know essentially we're going to have enough experiences, whether it's through teachers or family members who just demonstrated reliability, predictability, all of that wholesome, stabilizing influence, that see if you could fill the page. If you're listening, that would be a valuable exercise.
That's a great exercise. Yeah, because it's different to reading. You can Google anything and read these things on the internet, but having it come out of your own experience is far more powerful. I like that exercise.
Well, it also demonstrates what you've described about living in reality and in real time and keeping an eye on things. It's kind of those three in one.
Yeah. Another
comments while we...
Yes, could you have a look at those? Because I'm aware that on my device, they don't come up in real time lately for some reason. Okay. So if you check on your end as well.
Oh, fab. There's loads watching. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. Jo, we're glad that you're here. having mentioned it last week. So I'm going to start at the top. Stephanie says, no, sorry. Jo says it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical abuse, emotional abuse.
In fact, it's the emotional abuse that keeps us hooked in.
And it's more subtle, harder to act on. Stephanie says that she thinks she may be going through something like this. So great that you're here. Great that you have had the exposure. And I mean, there's some quality skills that you've offered today, Rachel. That's a solid start. Danielle says it never changes narcissistic behaviour because they'll always blame. That goes back to what we were saying. I mean, that's the key, isn't it? Are we both taking responsibility here? Very good question. Jo asks, do these types of relationships ever end well? Good question.
Not usually. I mean, I'm a highly sensitive, optimistic person myself. So I'd love to be able to, the idealistic part of me would love to say, yes, abusive folk and narcissists, they can change, but I haven't seen a lot of evidence, because often people who are manipulative, who are narcissistic, who have antisocial tendencies or difficult personalities, they often have very low shame resilience, which is a term from Brene Brown, which means that as soon as they start looking at themselves and taking responsibility for themselves, if they feel bad, if they feel any shame, they can't tolerate it. They can't bounce back from feeling shame. And so they just don't do it at all. And so the only alternative for them is to deflect and put it back on, project it back on to the other person or people around them. And so we get all of that projection and manipulation and gaslighting and all the emotional manipulation tactics that we see in perpetrators, if I can use that language. And it's very hard for them to do their work. Sometimes they hit rock bottom and they have an epiphany and they do their work. But I think for most people in trauma bonded relationships, I would say don't wait and hope. Don't stick around, because how long do you wait? This was my first marriage, to some degree.
I was like, how are you speaking about these people so eloquently?
Well, in my first relationship, I remember thinking, somebody said to me, this personality type that my ex had, he might mellow when he's 60. And I just thought, I can't wait. I'm not waiting. How long?
Free.
Well, I do say to a lot of my clients, if you've married somebody, or you've had children, or you've in some way committed, or maybe it's a boss and it's a job, don't leave on a whim. That's different. We're not talking about leaving on a whim. Most people in this situation, in a trauma bonded relationship, have waited and been empathic and had hope and tried everything. So you can put your hand on your heart and say, it's not like I didn't try. At some point you actually need to stop the wishful thinking. You need to give up hope. We need to experience the creativity of hopelessness, because actually hopelessness can make us very creative and put us into problem solving mode. I have no more false hope. Now, what am I going to do? Something's got to give,
Hope is not a strategy.
Hope is not a strategy. That's right. Crossing your fingers and hoping. You can't just cross your fingers and hope for the best.
There's so much content in what you're offering here tonight, Rachel. I'm hoping our listeners get a chance even later this week to go back and just go to those really relevant parts and just slow down the incredible amount of information you're delivering. And you've just answered part B of Jo's question. Or is it a get out and don't go back kind of thing?
Sometimes it really is.
So Jo also says, like asking, how much of the situation is my projection or interpretation? And I think she's talking about the delusion and illusion and even memories, and recognizing how much of these are actually our mental disturbances, not the reality, not our observations and our facts.
Well, that's why I mentioned the mutual responsibility. If the other person is willing to say, I've played my part in this dynamic as well, then we have reason to hope. Like, it's active hope, it's healthy hope. Even that doesn't guarantee that a relationship will last, but it's a very good start. If the other person is not taking responsibility for their part in the dynamic, forget it.
It's a no-brainer. Yes, that's a really, really helpful line in the sand. And it reminds me of what's a couple of therapists, some dear friends, psychotherapists down in Sydney, and I said to them, how do you know when a couple comes to see you, whether there's a future? I may have said this to you before, Rachel, and they both agreed if one party is not willing, which is essentially self-responsibility, then it's over. It's not actually a relationship. And if you think about it, if someone's not taking self-responsibility, they're not even really relating. Just living their life while you're trying to relate.
It's not healthy relating, that's for sure.
So Jaren says, it's truly amazing how easily priming can influence the perceptions of people. Priming can influence our perceptions. I'm wondering if that's about, infatuation or even grooming, maybe. Not sure exactly what you mean by priming, Jaren. Feel free to let us know some more detail.
I wonder if Jaren means like the frame that was originally set for us. So I'm thinking of this cult that I had to read about earlier in the week. And, if the people who got sort of seduced into the cult started with a frame of, this is how I'm going to be saved. This is my tribe. This is my answer. If something's framed as the answer, the solution to my anxiety and my existential dread, then that has primed them and made them extra susceptible or vulnerable to the trauma bond. I wonder if that's what Jaren means. Maybe you could tell us, Jaren.
And it's reminding me of a conversation I had with a client this week around trauma-informed policy, which I believe everybody should be aware of, the very basics, which absolutely are about framing our relationships in a very, very safe context. Cultural safety, neurodiversity safety, a lack of, unconscious bias is really what we're looking to eliminate. Yeah, that makes sense. If that's what you mean there, Jaren. And Stephanie says, my support service blames everything on their workers, never seems to take personal responsibility. So I think that Stephanie's talking about an unhealthy relationship in a work context, which goes back to your original comment around that trauma bonding can happen in a work setting as well. Quite easy to make a boss into a shared enemy. But what I'm hearing from what you've said, it's not really a genuine connection. There's not a real intimacy if that's really what our relationship is based on. Is that what you're saying, Rach?
Well, and I'm not sure what Stephanie means exactly, but I've, worked with many people who are kind of stuck with a carer or with a boss or a family member where it's hard to get out. They may not be able to get out. And this is where the grey rock method can come in handy. You can Google grey rock method. If you need to deal with someone who's going to continue to be manipulative or abusive, you can just be like the grey rock and be as boring and non-responsive as you can get away with in that relationship. And I'm not being idealistic here. I know that not every situation is easily solved. I guess I always say to people, let's just do what you can. And it might be a long process.
What's the grey rock? I didn't catch that. So basically, it's almost like stonewalling as a mechanism.
I was interviewed by a magazine a couple of weeks ago on the topic. I'll post the interview in the comments. But yeah, it's basically not responding emotionally to the manipulative behavior, but being as boring and uninteresting as you can be, not getting hooked in. And giving minimal responses and basically it's having very, very strong boundaries with that person.
Boundaries. You mentioned that. Yes, yeah. I love Brene Brown's very short video on boundaries. I'll post that below because she says it so succinctly that essentially it's not helping anyone if we lack boundaries, and boundaries are the key to compassion.
Yes, and self-compassion. So there's many things we can do here. So I think we've run out of time, perhaps.
We have. I'm due on mummy duties. But Rachel, so generous again today, really valuable. And please, we loved the request. So please let us know what you'd like to hear about. Just briefly, we have a workshop coming up on the 24th of July. So you can meet with Rachel and I in person here at U-Box in Graceville. That's the 24th of July from 9 till 12:30. And the topic of that one is motivation. This one is a really juicy. We might be doing this. We might have to do it again in the new year because this one has long-standing value. Motivation more than meets the eye. So we're looking at our values and our purpose and our meaning for intrinsic motivation in contrast to extrinsic, which might come from our parenting, our upbringing, our enculturation. So such a good one. I mean, again, it relates even to what we've talked about tonight. If I'm clear on my values, I'm more likely to be able to recognize when a relationship doesn't fit with those values. So that's I'll put the link again below.
Okay, that'll be great.
And the retreat is open for booking. So take your spot, guys, because we can only take 14 of you. And we go over to Stradbroke Island and we have 4 days together, so enough to get really deep. And I think we're going to be exploring some pretty interesting topics while we're there. And the group is always a really tight and beautiful experience too. So anything else from you, Rachel?
If people are interested to read more on this topic, the article I posted earlier today was really good. Go back and have a look at that. Yeah. And I'll be able to pop back on to the comments later tonight and answer any questions that people might have. And I'd love suggestions for next week's live stream. We had an idea about shadow work and how to use your own judgments of others to examine yourself more deeply. If no one suggests something better, we might do that, but we're open to suggestions from you guys.
And if you know someone who might be experiencing trauma bonding, you might just send them the video, especially knowing that Rachel's going to be moderating the comments later on. So if you send it on now, they'll have a chance to just add any questions if they might be recognising some of these patterns.
And ask them to like our Facebook page.
Of course, stay up on our events.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alexis. I appreciate your time.
Rachel, and you. Have a good evening.
Yes, you too. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.